it would totally transform the landscape of North America if every place that you went, you were able to really get a sense of what the deep history of that place is about. And it's actually through place-based knowledge that language can help us to really understand the deep history of those places.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. I'm Dan Gable, Technology Manager for the LRC. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language.
In our first episode of Season 3, we speak with Dr. Jolene Rickard, Director of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Program, about the United Nations 2019 International Year of Indigenous Languages.
Welcome to a new season of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the Director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. We hope 2019 was off to a good start for all our listeners. Speaking of 2019, we will kick off our third season of our podcast by talking about the 2019 International Year of Indigenous Languages. My colleague Jolene Rickard is here in the studio with me. Dr. Rickard is Associate Professor in the Department of History of Art and Visual Studies and also the Director of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Program. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Jolene.
Good morning.
So nice to have you here, and I am so excited to be talking to you not only about the program that you run here on campus, but also about this International Year of Indigenous Languages. So before we dive into this topic, could you please share with our listeners a little bit about your own background, the research that you do and the work that you do here on campus?
Absolutely. I'm from the Tuscarora Nation. So in our own way, when we greet each other, we would say Chwant Askanaha in our own language.
Mm-hmm.
And here at Cornell, I do wear multiple hats, including one, I think of myself and practice as a visual historian, having done both curatorial and archival work around Indigenous art. But I'm also committed to the promotion, development, and support, enrichment for Indigenous students and the topic of indigeneity here at Cornell through the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Program. The program actually has a very rich history. Mm-hmm. It's we're coming up on a 40th year anniversary.
Oh, nice.
Although Cornell has over 100-year relationship to Haudenosaunee territories. So just a introduction.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Wonderful. So why is the work that you do within the program, within the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Program, why is that so important specifically to the area where we are here, where we're located here with Cornell, the land we're on?
Well, I think that common practice today is to actually do a recognition of territory. And here, of course, it would be a recognition of the Cayuga Nation. Mm-hmm. And so I'd also like to point out that we use the word Cayuga in, one could argue, the English language, but in their own language, they refer to themselves as Guyanagoa. And so amongst the Haudenosaunee, there are also different levels of the way in which we refer to ourselves. And so
that's interesting.
So we actually are in the territory of the Guyanagoa.
Okay.
But I think that recognition of territory is something that is cannot be taken lightly, and therefore there needs to be an act of reciprocity between the institution and the Indigenous peoples that are being recognized.
Yeah.
And so I still think that here at Cornell, we're working at that. Although Cornell has supported Indigenous programming, it has yet to actually make Indigenous an acknowledgement that Indigenous, the relationship to the Cayuga Nation, which is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So the Haudenosaunee are, in the historic record, have been referred to as the Iroquois, Confederacy of Five Nations, and now the Six Nations. So there are many different archival ways that you can actually approach this. But today, the people refer to themselves in our own language, which is pronounced Haudenosaunee. And there are actually approximately six different spellings for that in the six different languages.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so the organization of the Haudenosaunee actually is a kind of geospatial organization with the Mohawk and the Eastern Door, which of course historically would have been along the Hudson Valley, and then we move west and we find the Oneida, and then the Onondaga, the Central Fire. We're in Cayuga territory. Then west of us, of course, are the Seneca, or keepers of the Western Door. And the Tuscarora, it has been suggested, are late arrivants. But recently, the people of the Tuscarora Nation, under the direction of Vince Schiffert, who is one of the community historians, have worked with the Confederacy to gain the recognition and acknowledgement that the Tuscarora were here in the Northern Territory as part of the this geopolitical space prior to the coming of the Guyanagoa, which is the Great Law of Peace, the message of the peacemaker, which, this landscape is the extraordinary backdrop of that message. And it's a message that is about a raised consciousness of struggling for and trying for a higher understanding of how we live and walk about this earth. And so that's what the Guyanagoa means. And so the Tuscarora left before the formation of the five families becoming one confederacy. And so it's a complex symbolism of this region. We went south for 1,000 years, lived in North Carolina, and then we came back home after the Tuscarora Wars in the 1700s. The reason I'm sharing this history is because we need to know a little bit of this history to understand the roots of Indigenous languages.
Yeah, and currently at Cornell, we don't teach any Indigenous languages, so that is something that I am certainly interested in maybe working toward. I know there are a couple of initiatives, a couple of discussions surrounding possibly looking into that and offering that, but that would be something that I think would be fantastic, specifically given this international year that we're in right now.
Right. And so I was so pleased that you you're bringing to the attention of this community the Year of Indigenous Languages, as noted by the Declaration of Indigenous Rights, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights, is their focus this year. And so in the field of Indigenous studies, Indigenous languages are taught in many different ways. Some schools, universities rely on the relationship to community and bring today what people would call elders or knowledge holders in to share the language. That's the model that I received in my own education.
Okay.
And so I worked with Seneca knowledge holders to learn the Seneca language. And I mean, one can only begin to scratch the surface of this, And so at the time, I had the speakers from the Seneca community available to us at the University of Buffalo. And so, this, of course, is years ago. And so they were a very early program to realize methodologically how critical language is to the intellectual formation of a culture.
Sure.
And so I was grateful that my intellectual mentor, John Mohawk, who was also Seneca, an author of a wonderful book called Thinking Indian, now deceased, but in our language we would say John Mohawk Geha, which automatically indicates that he's no longer with us.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's what's really interesting about the Haudenosaunee language is how specific it is in terms of one's positionality. And so I'm reminded by my daughter, who worked with Howard Hill, who was one of the last fluent speakers of the Tuscarora language.
Yeah.
And she reminded me that whenever she would ask him, "What does this word mean?" And he would say, "Well, who's saying it? Who are they saying it to? Where are they?
Yeah.
What time of day is it? What time of year is it?" And so all of these things become qualifiers
Yeah.
in the exact idea or word that, would need to be translated. So translation is not a simple, one-to-one corollary.
Sure. Oh.
And that's, I think, the amazing opportunity when students from who grew up within Romance languages get to encounter languages from other philosophical and cultural epistemes or or knowledge systems, because that's really helping, I think, a deeper kind of communication.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Are there currently other ways that learners or anybody who's interested in learning more about languages or learning some languages, where they can start if they don't have access to elders?
Well, yes. It's interesting because within Native communities today, and so the audience may recognize that I'm moving through the use of American Indian, Native American, and Indigenous. And they all have particular historic and cultural inflections.
Sure.
And so within the Academy today, most often we're using the term Indigenous because we understand the critique is global. Often when we're using the term Native American, it's signaling North America. But if we want to talk about the Americas at large, it's helpful to use the term Indigenous because it has a broader reach.
Sure.
But I have to say, John Mohoki, so I'll say, but most people still think of it as Indian, right? So, but all of it is, of course, a reduction of particular nation space or community names. And so there's a wide range of access. And so, for instance, I began an engaged Cornell project with a linguist that had graduated from Cornell, Dr. Kevin Conley. And Kevin wrote about the Onondaga language when he was here.
Okay.
And the archival record is incredibly rich as it relates to Haudenosaunee languages because we've been anthropologized, we've been studied to exhaustion,
of course,
and it's actually quite a rich resource if one has a proper guide through the archive. And so he did his dissertation while he was here at Cornell in the linguistics department, and we launched a project on trying to create an app to make Haudenosaunee languages more accessible.
Okay.
To be able to construct the linguistic blocks of these languages. And so, I mean, it's still a project that's ongoing, but in the middle of this project, his community or his nation, the Onondaga Nation, withdrew their consent to teach the language to people outside of their communities.
Okay.
And so you have that kind of situation where it's very interior, and I think we can respect and understand it because of the impact of extractive research and coloniality.
Certainly.
But then you have the other side of it where you have the Mohawk people and nation whose language has made an incredible resurgence, who teach their language at university across North America. And there are enough speakers to actually be able to launch this kind of intense Mohawk immersion. And so in the communities, there are multiple immersion projects going on at present.
Yeah.
But in And so I would say I think that the axis is really in academia. I can't say that I know of like access in maybe there might be access that I'm not familiar with, but certainly I'm sure there is in extension projects,
Sure. Yep.
but not in this region, So it depends on the veracity or strength of the language,
Of course.
and it also depends on the attitude of the peoples whose language it is.
Yep.
Right.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But there are apps, right?
Yeah.
So that you can get like the Dene or Navajo. There are apps, and the Cayuga language actually has an app. And so we can say hello this morning in Cayuga.
Wow. I'm not even going to attempt to repeat that, but I'll be listening to it, and the next time I see you, maybe I can.
And so most of the Haudenosaunee greetings are asking you, like for instance in Tuscarora, it's Chwant Askenahe. And so you'll hear Eskenahe. In Mohawk, it's Sego. And so this is like the core word for peace.
Okay.
And so what the greetings are consistently asking you is, are you at peace today? And so, and this is all about the context, because it's possible to like ask somebody individually if they're at peace. And it's really about this like sense of well-being.
Yeah.
Right? That's really what the greeting is about. But then there's the larger notion of peace, where when we say the Great Law or Gayanagoa, which is the Mohawk version of it, that's where you see again the Goa in here. This this idea of Sego. This idea of thinking and focused on this larger idea of peace.
Yeah.
And so it's it's what I have found in teaching, that it takes quite a bit of time to actually teach one concept, to teach one word.
Of course, yeah, because they're so complex. Yeah.
And that's separate from, I think, the work of structural linguists that are really trying to help someone to be able to reproduce exactly the language. And so I'm interested in helping students and helping a broader community understand the concepts in these cultures through the language. And so I do think that, there are different, we need all of this.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe somebody might say, well, what do we really need Indigenous languages for? But I think we do need multiple worldviews at play in the world today.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't, especially in the world today. I can't agree more with you on that. So as part of this international year, are there any specific events that your program is putting on that would tie in to kind of raise awareness and highlight this UN International Year of Indigenous Languages?
At the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program, we actually are working with the Rappi Center, collaborating with the Rappi Center, and graduate student Bruno Sapier is working, is the lead sort of person from the Rappi Center, but he's also a minor in American Indian and Indigenous Studies, but I think he's located in anthropology as well. You know how these students here have like multiple locations. But we're actually focused on the Gayanagoa and the this broader notion of peace at this period of time. And we are bringing in several speakers to be able to address this question. Kenneth Deere, who is on the standing committee of the external relations for the Haudenosaunee, who is doing work on the doctrine of discovery, is seeking audience with the Pope to rescind the papal bulls, which of course are the underpinnings of coloniality today.
Yeah.
But he's also done some really interesting work along the border, the southern border, uh, about raising consciousness that many of the people that are migrating north are Indigenous peoples.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so what does that mean
Yeah.
in the Americas,
Mm-hmm.
where their rights precede the contemporary boundaries that are established by nation states that are
Yeah.
actually quite young compared to the longevity of Indigenous peoples on this land,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
this is, of course, based on the model of the Haudenosaunee, because our territories extend in New York State, Ontario, Quebec, uh, actually uh, a group out in Wisconsin and a smaller group in Kansas. And
Mm-hmm.
so our people have to negotiate an international border every day
Mm-hmm.
just to maintain family
Yeah.
relationships. And so we're vigilant about our right to move freely in our
Of
own
course.
homelands.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we think that right should be extended to other Indigenous
Mm-hmm.
peoples that have
Mm-hmm.
been impacted by the border. So the discussion is informed by the deeper philosophical understanding of Guyanagoa, which we are lucky that a solicitor from Canada who is also Onondaga, his name is Paul Williams, will also be joining us. He's recently published a book. This is, I think, um, uh, going to be it is an amazing thing that he's been able to pull together these like really serious reflections
Mm-hmm.
on the Great Law or Guyanagoa, and 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 so this will be a centerpiece or a core of how we're going to uh, look at this relationship, because it's all interconnected.
Of course, yeah.
But through a class that I'm teaching called Indigenous Ingenuities, we have a number of speakers that are coming through that are all doing this work in some way. So we have, and part of the ambition of the class is to actually help students to realize, as an academic, yes, my subjectivity is located in my Tuscarora heritage. But it's important for them to hear from title holders, to hear from clan mothers, to hear from people that are practitioners of ceremony, people that are the authors of Indigenous media and press and artisans, so that they complicate their understanding of what Indigenous space is, instead of this kind of like really reduced, tomahawk chop kind of attitude that we see prevailing today in society.
Sure.
So, this is an opportunity to think this through.
Mm-hmm. This is wonderful. This is fantastic work that you do.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you think so. Well, I think it's wonderful, that you get to do this work too.
So where can our listeners find out more? You said that there are some speakers, if those are open to the public.
Yes.
Is there a website that we can direct our listeners to?
Yes, just look for the American Indian and Indigenous Studies Program,
Okay.
AIISP at Cornell, and it'll pop up, and you'll be able to check out what our, what we're working on.
Fantastic.
Right.
Great.
But I do think that we're just a tiny little effort in a much broader effort, I think, to recenter Indigenous knowledge within our communities, and language is the key component of that. Yeah.
I like to hear that.
Yeah.
And whatever we can do here to help support that.
Right.
We will certainly work on that.
Well, I wasn't surprised that the UN declared this year the Year of Indigenous Languages. In fact, what I was surprised, it didn't happen sooner.
Oh, okay.
Because I do see this as a central tenet in the ongoing formation of Indigenous knowledge.
Yep. And we will provide a link to your program and also to the general website for this International Year on our website. So if people are interested in finding out more about the events that are going on a national level, you can certainly look for information there. The website is iyil2019.org, but again, that will be linked along with the link to your program. Jolene, thank you so much for coming today, for sharing all this information, and for getting this conversation started here.
Right. Well, thank you. I have to say that I've been very inspired in my own work, which is looking at Indigenous art internationally. And when you go to Aotearoa or New Zealand and you walk into their airport, you begin to realize that it's a bilingual space. And so the richness of that, of understanding and having to negotiate their worldview, it was a wonderful experience. And I just think that the Americas, in particular North America, with over hundreds of Indigenous communities in North America, that it would totally transform the landscape of North America if every place that you went in the Americas or in North America, you were able to really get a sense of what the deep history of that place is about. And it's actually through place-based knowledge that language can help us to really understand the deep history of those places. And I just think that we're at that point. It's like we are at a point where we need to raise our consciousness about the environment, our relationship to each other as human beings. And here are peoples who've been in this part of the world for millennia, who have carefully named different places in this part of the world. And it would be a wonderful project to think about, what if everybody in North America knew at least one Indigenous word for the name place where they're living? Just think how transformative that could be. And I do think from a platform like Cornell, we could actually inspire something like that.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
We would say Nyawa, and the Mohawks would say Nyawana Goa.
Okay. So. Well, I can say danke.
Okay.
Dankeschön. Next week, Dr. Michelle Cox, the director of Cornell's English Language Support Office, will join us. Tune in to hear more about the programs they offer to support, empower, and engage international graduate and professional students on our campus and in the community. Until then, auf Wiederhören.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter. Speaking of Language is produced by Sam Lupowitz and Dan Gable. Recorded by Sam Lupowitz. Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson. Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University. As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University. We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.